What's up, guys? Been a while since I did a top 50. I think this is the third one, and we're gonna do top 50 horror sequels. No remakes. Let's go. What's up, guys? Welcome to another big and thick video. We're gonna do a top 50. So excited about this. Couple of ground rules for this top 50. This is for sequels. Anything after the original first movie is fair game, except I'm going to leave out remakes for the most part. Now, I think there's one exception in here, but I look at it as if it's not a straight up remake, if this could technically be a sequel because the characters are different, the locations are different, maybe the story's even kind of twisted a little bit, then it's fair game for me, okay? An example of that, and I'm not telling you if this movie's on here or not, but like Evil Dead 2013, the remake. Some have said that could be a sequel because it's not the same story as the first movie, okay? So that's an example for you. I'm not saying Evil Dead, the remake, which I love that movie, by the way. Another reason I'm doing that is because I don't want to repeat myself. I have two greatest remakes lists out there, okay? I'll put a link to the first one up here, a card, so you can see that. But so I'm gonna try to give you guys your money's worth and leave that stuff out of here. And I don't know if I said this, but prequels do count, all right? There are some prequels on this list. Prequels are fair game. Also, I thought it would be tough to come up with a top 50 sequels. But actually it's the opposite. I actually had to leave quite a few off of this list. I tallied everything that I could think of, ended up with more than, probably like 60 or something like that. And then I constantly had to go back and say, nah, maybe that one should be over this one, or this one should be over this one. So just back and forth. And I really went into painstaking detail to give you a quality top 50, okay? And this is tiered. I tiered this in 5 sections. 50 to 40 is tier 5, all the way down to 10 to 1, which is tier 1, okay? So just know that as I'm going along this way, once we get to like in the 40s, okay, now we're in tier 4. So I'm not giving you just a random scattering and then the top 10. No, these are all great movies, but the least favorite is going to be number 50 all the way to number 1. So once I get to the top 10, probably 5 out of 5 movies, okay? That's how great these are. And lastly, I have to say this is my list. Some of you are gonna get really mad, especially with some of the selections on this list, okay? This is my list, all right? And also keep this in mind too. Like for the big 3, only 2 entries for the big 3 per, per franchise. All right, because I don't want to freaking overload this list with the big 3. I want to give you a lot of variety in this list. All right, so only 2 for the big 3. Whew, I'm nervous. Okay, without further ado, let's do this. Gonna run through these quickly. Okay, I've reviewed just about every movie, if not every movie, on this list. If you want my in-depth opinions on these movies, go check out the reviews. I'm just gonna try to burn through these to not take up too much of your time as quick as possible. Number 50, Hellraiser 3. This is the only Hellraiser sequel I'm gonna have on here. A lot of you are gonna get mad because I didn't put part 2 on here. I just think part 3 is the much more accessible, it's more entertaining than the rest of the movies really in the franchise, okay? I think part 2 is probably a better story, a better movie, but I think it's just a tougher watch for me. Whereas part 3, I just have a good time with it, And I think part 3 is where you get probably the best Pinhead. Plus, I'm not like a fanatic of the Hellraiser franchise. Number 49, The Collection, the sequel to The Collector, which really turned the horror genre on its head. Really graphic. I think, I was just talking about Hellraiser being more like entertaining as far as part 3. I think The Collection is kind of the same way, and it opens up with this great nightclub sequence, kind of reminiscent of Ghost Ship at the beginning of that movie, where pretty much this entire club gets slayed by this contraption that's made up by the Collector. But this one really ups the stakes too. Arkin back in this one, and it's a shame that we're not getting a third movie. Hopefully it comes to fruition. Number 48 is Sleepaway Camp 2. I love Sleepaway Camp 2 because it doesn't go in more of a serious tone than the first movie does. And as much as I love the first movie, it's like one of my all-time favorite slashers. it is a little silly because of how it takes itself so seriously. Whereas this one knows exactly what it is. I think Pamela Springsteen fills those shoes of Angela very nicely, and I think she gives her own take on the character. You could even say that this Angela is different than Felissa Rose's Angela, and that's fine. But I just love the kills in this one. It's just a lot of fun to be had. Pamela Springsteen's performance is just infectious and high rewatch value. Number 47, Prom Night 2. This is one of those instances where they go a different direction than the first movie. It is a completely different story, different subgenre even, because the first one is a slasher, A-level slasher. This one is more of like a supernatural type of deal. It kind of borrows a little bit from Nightmare on Elm Street. It just feels like dream sequences. There's some bonkers moments in this movie, some really funny lines. And one of the big things that holds this up is the cast too, because I absolutely love the characters of Vicky and Mary Lou, of course. Michael Ironside making an appearance too. Awesome stuff. Number 46, The Thing, the prequel. This is our first prequel in the countdown. This movie does get a lot of hate, and I think it's just because of the CGI, even though there is a practical effects version out there that will probably never see the light of day. Maybe, we'll see. But Mary Elizabeth Winstead is fantastic in this role. I am just really into that whole world that John Carpenter created. Very much different than, you know, The Thing from Another World, the 50s version. And I like that this one explores the Norwegian camp, you know? So we get to see how the pieces are put together connecting to John Carpenter's version. And the ending credits of this movie marry up, I mean, perfectly with John Carpenter's. I don't think the prequel's perfect. It doesn't even hold a candle to Carpenter's classic, but it still has that tone and it maintains that vibe perfectly. Number 45 is Wrong Turn. Now this is the one case where I'm gonna use technically the remake, but to me it's just so different than the original. And funny enough, Alan B. McElroy wrote this movie as well as the first. It feels like a sequel. You know, it feels like they're going into a new territory. It's not, you know, the mountain men, or I guess a different version of them. You know, the foundation is what's in this movie. But the big thing that I love about this movie is the main character, and the credit scene in this movie. I'm not going to do spoilers on this list, but one of the best in-credit sequences I've ever seen. Number 44, Creepshow 2. This is just a childhood favorite of mine. I love these anthologies. I loved the original Creepshow. And I think this one is just as good as the first one, just because of a couple of the sequences in this. You know, hey lady, can I catch a ride? That is just one of those lines that you just can't stop saying. Like, I still say it to this day. And I saw this when it first came out. And then, of course, the raft is just a terrifying sequence. I don't know what the hell that creature is in that lake, but it's just slowly getting towards them. And I think what works so well is just watching these young characters slowly lose their minds as that creature is getting towards them, because, you know, they can try to swim away, but more than likely it's going to catch them. So, and the payoff is really great at the end of that segment of the movie. Number 43, A Quiet Place 2. One of the newer movies on this countdown. I think it's a worthy follow-up to the first movie. I actually thought the first movie a bit overrated, just because I didn't care too much about the creatures, you know? But what made the first one work so well was the family, the characters, you know, and John Krasinski. This one, I think, ups the ante, and what it does right is it makes me more interested in the creatures than it did in the first movie, you know? There's a lot more action. Cillian Murphy, nice addition. Emily Blunt, constantly slaying it. Really enjoyed A Quiet Place 2. Number 42, Blade 2. Thank God I'm able to put a freaking Blade sequel on this movie. And there's only one good sequel. The third one is pretty much crap. Ryan Reynolds saves that movie, but this one's really fun. I love the character of Nomak. That guy has actually been used in a couple of Guillermo del Toro's films too. But you know, just this one, I like that it feels like a different movie than the first movie. And both are equally effective. But, you know, it's hard to really get a great vampire movie. And the Reapers in this were more terrifying than the others. So Blade had this new challenge ahead of him, and you know, in the first movie, you felt like he didn't have any problem beating any of them, including Deacon Frost. Whereas in this one, Nomak was a force to be reckoned with. Number 41, Inferno. This is the first of my Italian horror selections on this list. There's a few of them. Dario Argento did the Mother's Trilogy, Suspiria being the first movie. Inferno is the second movie in that the characters are completely different and the story is completely different. But technically, it's a sequel. Most people call it a sequel just because it's part of the Mother's Trilogy. And I think there is a connecting factor here because of this book that has to do with the three mothers. And there's this character that dies and her brother has to investigate her mother. But the plot aside, this movie is just visually intoxicating. There's a cool underwater sequence in it. And it's one of the most memorable, I wouldn't say the best, but one of the most memorable Italian horror films I've ever seen. Interesting backstory too, because Dario Argento was really sick when he did this movie. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Mario Bava had to step in and finish the movie. But it's nice because you get, you know, a Bava and an Argento movie all in one. But it's just a beautifully done movie. Number 40 is Fear Street, 1978. We are entering tier 4 now. I'm so glad that I got to include at least one of the movies out of this trilogy. And it just so happens that the sequel to the first one, even though all three of these movies are kind of together, this one takes place in 1978. And it's my favorite one because it's like a camp slasher. But what I like about this too is I love the characters. I love that you do have like a sackhead killer, but they also sprinkle in some of the other killers, especially in the last act. I think Sadie Sink is really making a name for herself. And this just so happens to be a middle chapter. And I tend to prefer middle chapters in trilogies because the ending, you know, it's going to be kind of open-ended. And this one, it grabs onto the 1994 and the last chapter quite well, but you're still grounded in this camp slasher, and it's just a lot of fun. Number 39, Prey. This is the only Predator movie on the list. I probably could have put Predator 2, but I think Prey's the better movie, and that's a controversial decision, but I think the best thing they could have done was got right back down to basics. Sometimes you want to go a different direction, but sometimes for a property like Predator, it's not a bad idea to just kind of stay with the same territory. And they mix it up a little bit because it's like an Indian tribe, and you have this young female warrior that her tribe doesn't really take her seriously. And so she's just kind of sitting in the back and learning the characteristics of the Predator and learns how to fight it in the end. And I really just enjoyed her journey throughout this. It was quite captivating, actually. I like the look of the Predator in this movie. There was some controversy, of course, because we live in this day and age where if there's a strong woman, we got to call it woke. And it's stupid. I can't stand it. But this was, it was so good. It was so satisfying, okay? Definitely not woke. Number 38, The Hills Have Eyes Part 2. This is the sequel to the remake, okay? Because the original Hills Have Eyes Part 2, I've only seen it once. Don't remember liking it that much at all. But the sequel to the remake is actually pretty good. It's one of those where you have like a military type crew and they're going to study the desert where, you know, the mountain men live. And you get exactly what you want out of a Hills Have Eyes 2 movie. You know, just bloody carnage. Some of them really go far with some of the lady folk and violate them. But there's just not a dull moment in this movie at all. You know, it's just full on like mountain men action throughout the whole thing. Number 37, Slumber Party Massacre 2. This one just takes that fun vibe of the first movie and really turns it on its head. It just goes full tilt, you know, not taking itself too seriously, very tongue-in-cheek. The thing they did differently with this one is they didn't use Russ Thorne, the driller killer, who that character played it really serious the whole way through. This one, you had the rockabilly killer, and he was just really fun. You know, you could kind of compare him to like what Ash was in Evil, you know, like Evil Dead 2. But Ash was a good guy. But they both have these silly mannerisms. And really the Rockabilly Killer, he's kind of a question mark. He's entering one of the character's dreams. It's just a bonkers movie, but damn, it's just so fun. You know, it embodies everything that you want out of a Slumber Party Massacre movie. Number 36, The Crow, City of Angels. This is a controversial one. It took me years to really see this movie for what it was. It's not perfect at all. You can say it's kind of bad, but there's so much charm to the movie, and I would love to see the actual director's cut, not the official released director's cut that they have, which that's not a director's cut. The real director's cut, I think, is like 20 minutes longer, and it's a version that we'll probably never see. But I just like how unique this movie is. A lot of people hate all of the sequels of The Crow. I think this one's like a perfect marriage of some of the elements of the original, because Vincent Perez does kind of resemble Brandon Lee, but he gives a different performance. And I like the LA aesthetic of City of Angels, you know? And my God, the freaking soundtrack, top notch. Number 35, Child's Play 2. This is a natural progression of the first movie. Bigger, badder. Chucky is like in full rare form with his one-liners in this movie. You know, goddamn women drivers. He just has so many great one-liners in this one. You know, this one's just balls to the wall fun. And this is one of those cases where you have a great duo together with Andy and Kyle. They just work very well together. She is, I think, is that his like foster sister or something like that? Because he goes and stays with, or maybe she's his cousin. I can't remember. It's been a while since I watched Child's Play 2. But man, it's just so damn fun. The scene with the freaking teacher, the lady that was in the Donnie Darko. Oh my God, love it. And you just can't deny Brad Dourif, you know? Without Brad Dourif, Chucky wouldn't be Chucky. He is perfection in that character. Number 34, Scream 4. You might see another Scream movie, especially if you paid attention to my socials, okay? But Scream 4, I go back and forth because Scream 4 used to be my second favorite of the franchise. And it got moved to the third favorite recently. I still love this one. You know, this is the last one that Wes Craven directed. I think this is probably the darkest. They go a little bit overboard in the beginning with like, you know, too many openings. Probably one of my favorite final acts, if I'm being honest. I loved Emma Roberts and Rory Culkin in the final, especially Emma Roberts as Jill. Like Jill is, you know, if you're like ranking the characters of Scream, the killers of Scream, she ranks up there pretty high, and I think I've actually done that list. But this one explores like remakes, which is cool. That's one thing I just love about Scream anyway. That's like my favorite aspect of that franchise, is how they explore whatever's current in horror at the time. And this was right when remakes were just really oversaturating the market. Number 33, The Rage Carrie 2. I spent quite a few years avoiding this movie. I really never heard any kind of hoopla over it. And then when I watched it, I fell in love with it. And it is a direct sequel, but I think this movie came out at least like a decade after. But Emily Burgle as Rachel, I think might be just as effective as what Sissy Spacek did with Carrie. And I absolutely love the Blu-ray edition of this movie. That scene in the final act when, you know, she, I guess, rages out, it goes heavier and darker than you would expect, much like the first movie did. And I think just very satisfying. Number 32, Nightmare on Elm Street 2. I swear I fall in love with this movie more and more every time I watch it. I think Mark Patton, as you know, he was this is pretty much a gay movie, okay? And he's the final girl of this movie. They kind of switched the roles. Kim Myers playing the guy in the movie, and he's playing the final girl. And it just works. But this is my favorite version of Freddy. I love how he's constantly torturing Jesse psychologically throughout without having to touch him. You know, this is a great character exploration that's not really touched on before or since in the franchise. I love that it's really been finding its audience over the years. And I'll even say, probably one of my favorite opening sequences with the school bus. Number 31, Jaws 2. How do you compete with the first movie? But this one does it quite well. I often compare this to Halloween 2. It just has that, you know, I call it that Universal Studios appeal. It looks like the first movie, even though I think they had a different DP on this one. When I reviewed the movie, I thought it was Dean Cundy, but no, it was a different DP doing this movie. But I always call this the slasher movie of the franchise, just because it's these teenagers and they're all stuck in the ocean for the final act of the movie, and Jaws is just going through picking them off one by one, you know. Don't try to recapture what they did in the final act of the first movie with Brody, and maybe make it more accessible for a younger audience. And I love Jaws 2. I constantly go back and I watch it. Number 30, Demons 2. This one, it's a sequel to the first movie, obviously, but I like the setting of this one. It takes place on a high rise, and there's just little differences between this one and the first one. Equally as effective, equally the amount of bloodshed. I think it might not be as scary as the first movie, but I just have so much fun with this one, especially the scene where the guy's like coming out of the TV, really cool. The soundtrack is a little different because in the first movie, it depended on more like metal type stuff, whereas this one, it leans heavily in like new wave. So I think the great thing in terms of a sequel with Demons 2 is it just gives you another flavor, but you still have the same type recipe, if that makes sense. And it's Italian horror goodness is what it is. Number 29, Return of the Living Dead 3. Probably one of my favorite zombie films. And I think Return of the Living Dead being one of my favorite zombie films. But I loved this one. Completely different story. But having this love story here with this character, Julie, who throughout the movie, she's turning into a zombie. And as far as visuals go, like that freaking scene at the end of the movie is just so iconic. But this movie's really heartfelt too. You know, this is one of the very few zombie movies where you feel so much for this character that is slowly turning into a zombie, you know, becoming undead. Number 28, When a Stranger Calls Back. I just reviewed this movie a few months ago. I went through the entire 3 movies, I guess, you know, with the remake. But everybody kept telling me about the opening of this movie and how it is just as effective, if not more effective, than the original movie. And you know what? I kind of agree. Unfortunately, the rest of the movie doesn't hold up to that very first 20 minutes. But my God, that first 20 minutes are just nail-biting. This was my introduction to Jill Schoelen too, and she is fantastic in this movie, but she really is amazing in that first section. I'll even say this one in the first movie, probably the best exercise in tension I have ever seen, probably since the original Halloween. Number 27, I Still Know What You Did Last Summer. And I'm still glad that I gave this movie a second shot because when I watched it the first time, I didn't like it at all. I think I let Jack Black's performance kind of smother the rest of the movie for me when he's not that big of a deal. And I really just enjoy the fact that this one's set in kind of like a thunderstorm, you know, a hurricane. And anytime you throw in like the elements, the weather into a horror movie, it just ups the ante. But also, I kind of like the twist in this movie. I didn't even remember that twist when I first watched it. But I just really enjoyed this movie this time. Jennifer Love Hewitt, pretty damn easy on the eyes in this one too. Number 26, Strangers Pray at Night. This was probably one of my biggest surprises of that year. I believe it being 2018. And I just remember coming out of the theater just floored by what I just saw. You know, and this is one of those movies that was just kind of passed over. Wasn't even pushed that heavily marketing-wise. I think it just pulls out all the stops in the final act with what happens with our main characters and the killer. I absolutely loved Kinsey, the final girl who happens to be a teenager. Bailey Madison, just fantastic. Loved the dynamics between her and her brother. Number 25 is Phantasm 2. I think most people tend to agree that Phantasm 2 is the best movie. You can kind of compare this to Terminator 1 and Terminator 2 just because of how different the first movie and this one feel. And both of them are equally effective, but this one is, I think, much more action-packed. It was interesting that they replaced A. Michael Baldwin with James LeGros. But James LeGros holds his own, and I think he works well in this movie. I think it would have been cool if A. Michael Baldwin would have been able to play him, but still, I think this is easily the best and the most accessible movie out of the entire Phantasm franchise. Number 24, Bride of Chucky. I'm a casual Chucky fan, but even I can't deny the appeal, the charm of Bride of Chucky. You know, they took the obvious about the character of how funny he is. They just injected steroids into that idea. And also introducing Tiffany, Jennifer Tilly, irresistible character. But this movie, great soundtrack, so freaking fun. Sometimes I think I prefer this one over like all the movies. What's nice about this one is it's so different than the first movie, and you might be in the mood for, you know, Bride of Chucky. I'm not in the mood for the original, but I'm definitely in the mood for Bride, you know, and vice versa. And also, best look of Chucky out of the entire franchise is Bride of Chucky. Number 23, The Conjuring 2. I wanted to put one of these like demon possession types of films on here. There are a few. I think Conjuring 2 is a worthy follow-up to the first movie. It's not the same rinse and repeat. You know, I like that it takes place over in the UK. And I like that it's based on a true story. That old man's voice coming out of the little girl, some really, really creepy stuff. And it's a shame that the third movie just doesn't hold a candle to the first two. But the second one, quality stuff. Number 22, 10 Cloverfield Lane. Another one of those sequels, nothing to do with the original. I mean, the original is a freaking, it's almost like a Godzilla movie, you know? So I love that they took this one. Let's go a lot more small scale. Let's make it like a kidnapping type deal and focus in on that for like 99% of the movie. You know, you forget that this is in that Cloverfield world and, you know, there's like supernatural stuff and alien type stuff. And then they just kind of like pull the rug out from under you at the end, like, oh yeah, shit, we're still in that world. Really cool. But, you know, again, another Mary Elizabeth Winstead performance that, you know, she's just one of those actresses that really can, you know, lock you in to whatever character she's playing. And you want her to get out of this situation, you know, being locked in that basement. I sometimes think that The Black Phone might have borrowed some of the elements of 10 Cloverfield Lane. I don't know if the book was actually written before 10 Cloverfield Lane, but I actually prefer 10 Cloverfield Lane over The Black Phone. Not to take anything away from that movie. Number 21 is Dr. Sleep. Thank God I gave this movie another chance, because when I first watched it, it is long, and I think the big mistake I made was I constantly compared it to the first movie, The Shining, which is, I mean, how do you freaking compare to one of the greatest horror films of all time? And what you do is you make a completely different story based around the same characters, you know, because Danny's in this one, but introducing new characters that are equally as effective and strong as like what happened with, you know, Jack in the first movie. You know, Rose the Hat, immediately an iconic character. And definitely do yourself a favor and check out the director's cut. That is the one to watch. Number 20, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Beginning. You know, obviously you want to put the remake on here, but like I said, I'm not putting remakes on here, but The Beginning counts because it is a prequel. And I've often even said this. You know, both of them are close, but I think I might prefer The Beginning over the remake. You know, they both fit together perfectly. But I think Arlie Ermey really ups his game in this one, you know, with the torture aspect like he does to one of the characters. I like that this one takes place, I think, a little bit more in the daytime than the remake. And really, this one gets super graphic in the final act. But, you know, of all the Platinum Dunes productions back then, this is one of my favorite for sure. And I think Texas stands out above the pack because of the work. You know, thank God that Platinum Dunes owned that franchise for a good period. Number 19, Final Destination 5. This one was tough because I wanted to put part 2 on here, obviously, for that freaking amazing opening. But I think this is probably the best sequel of the bunch. I think the first one's still the best, but especially after part 4, which was borderlining on like B-movie territory, especially in the effects. Like, it looked like almost Walmart dumpster fire quality. Whereas 5, it's like they threw some more money in the budget, and it just looks like a better film. The story is a little bit darker, deeper, goes in a different direction a little bit. And the final act, you know, because all these movies have nice like twists at the end, but man, this one, not gonna spoil it, but I just didn't see that coming at all. Where this movie landed in the franchise, I was just completely blown away by. Fantastic kills too, by the way. I mean, you always want to watch these movies for the kills, and you know, the freaking the optometrist scene, ooh, that was pretty creepy. And of course the gymnast scene, hilarious. These are movies you want to see with an audience. Number 18, Halloween Ends. I knew you guys were wondering, where's Halloween gonna be in here? I have to put Halloween Ends in here just because, you know, it takes what was done in like Halloween 3, but it marries it up a little bit with the Michael Laurie type of deal. I think the biggest thing that works so well about this movie too is just expectations. It completely took a left turn, and if you weren't on board with this Corey character and where they went with him and Allison and his relationship with Myers, then you just didn't, you weren't there. You hated the movie, and I get that. A lot of people hated the movie, but man, I'm so obsessed with this movie now. I've seen it like 4 or 5 times, and it's refreshing. As much as I love kills, by the time you're done with that movie, you feel like you need a bath. You know, it's just slasher overload, and that's great. That's what you want out of that movie. So I'm glad that they didn't continue that route. And a lot of people say that, you know, they weren't satisfied with the conclusion. They're not wrong. They're not wrong, because this feels so different than those previous 2 movies. I was still just highly satisfied with this, because I've always wanted them to try to veer away from what they've been doing with the Myers formula. As much as I love Myers, he's my boy, I'm glad that they tried something different, you know? And for me, it just didn't disappoint. I thought this movie was almost poetic. It was beautiful in moments. It didn't depend on crazy kills, even though it had a couple. To me, it just felt more artistic, I guess. Number 17, 28 weeks later. Probably one of my favorite zombie films, even though some people say this is a virus film. It's not a zombie film. I still call it that because they're not dead, but they're infected and they're chasing you, okay? And they want to kill you and eat you and do whatever, all right? You can have that debate all day, but I still kind of, we'll say they're cousins of zombies, all right? We'll call it that. But I think as far as like emotion goes, because these movies can get really emotional, zombie films, just the one scene where the father, you know, he has all this guilt, and then he sees his wife for the first time after he had left her. And that scene is heartbreaking, also terrifying. You know, it turns on a dime. You're almost crying, and then you're scared out of your mind. And I really hope we get 28 months. I constantly get questions on that update. Are we ever going to get a new update? Hopefully soon. Number 16, Split. Boy, this was a surprise. You know, you go into this movie thinking it's not a sequel. This is a little spoiler here for you, okay? But you go into Split thinking it's not a sequel. And then the very end of the movie, you realize, holy shit, this is a sequel to Unbreakable. And I just remember sitting in a theater, and my son and I, we were big fans of that world, you know, big fans of Unbreakable. And there were some people in the theater that didn't get it, you know, because it was subtle. It wasn't some guy looking into the camera saying, hey guys, this is a sequel to Unbreakable. No, they clued you in with that musical cue. But also James McAvoy's performance is phenomenal. I always say actors in horror, they don't get the credit they deserve, because if this was a different genre of movie, James McAvoy would have been nominated. But because it's horror, you know, because it's M. Night Shyamalan, I guess they don't take it seriously. But wow, I mean, he had to do like, I think 23 freaking different personalities. Insane stuff, and a great movie. Number 15, The Devil's Rejects. Rob Zombie, I think, hit a stride of perfection. I use that word loosely, but House of a Thousand Corpses, love that movie. And then you'd think he would follow it up with something that's like psychedelic like that movie is. But no, Devil's Rejects is more Texas Chainsaw Massacre territory. And probably some of his most uncomfortable scenes in his library are from Devil's Rejects, especially that motel scene. This was like a good Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That's what I call The Devil's Rejects. Very well done film, actually. When you can take this family and make them charismatic and funny, and dare I say you even feel for them at times, even though they're doing horrible, horrible things. That takes some good writing. And you know what? I got to give Zombie credit here, okay? Because we always give him crap about his writing. Rightfully so sometimes, but I loved his writing in The Devil's Rejects. Number 14, Evil Dead 2. One of the most iconic films in horror history. Some people say it's pretty much a straight up remake of the first movie with just a different vibe. You know, it's zany. You can see some influence of stuff like the Three Stooges in this movie, you know, if you look that far back. But physical comedy, you know, Bruce Campbell's performance in this is legendary. And I think this is what cemented him as a horror icon. as Ash. You know, he's Ash in the first movie. You know, you still get some cool moments in there, but this is where you get groovy and all that stuff. You know, this is the movie that catapulted him into the horror icon stratosphere. Number 13, Pearl. I literally just gave this movie another watch right before. Like A24 just sent me this freaking package of all their movies from 2022, and Pearl was in there. I was like, oh good, I want to give this movie another watch before I do this countdown. And I did. There's a scene at the end of this movie with Mia Goth where, you know, the camera is just fixed on her for what feels like forever. And she's given this whole monologue and there's zero cuts and then tears are rolling down her face. And my God, what an actress and what a character. And I just love that this movie is so different than X, even though it kind of embodies that same world because Pearl is a character in X. I'd say Mia Goth, wow, one of the greatest actresses working today. Just beautiful performance in this movie, and it's fun to watch this character completely go off the rails and just bonkers crazy throughout this movie. And it's heartwarming because, you know, she is just this person that wants to have a life, to leave this farm and be somebody. You know, and who can't relate to that? I would imagine a lot of people, when they watch this movie, they probably had a tear in their own eye. Number 12, Scream 2. The longest time, for some reason, I just did not get on board with Scream 2. And so many people loved this movie. And I think something happened. I think after I watched Scream 5 a few times, I just didn't care for that movie at all. And it's like every time I watched it, I liked it less. And then I went back and I watched Scream 2. Again, because I think I was just going through the franchise. It's like it leaped out at me finally. And the last act in Scream 2 is so good. It's hard to compete with Billy and Stu in the last act of the first movie, but I think this is damn near close. And it's just very big and epic and operatic, you know, taking place in this theater stage. I think the mighty have fallen. You know, after Scream 5, the final act just, it's the worst final act in the entire franchise. I'll say it right now. Scream 2, it's a great freaking sequel, you know? And I can't believe I didn't see it for the longest time. It was like I was blinded by something. I don't know what it was. Scream 2's epic, actually. And I'm not even like a Scream franchise fanatic, but I do love Scream 2. Number 11. Friday the 13th, Part 6. This is the first and maybe only, we'll see, of the Friday movies. And Friday Part 6, boy, this came out at a time where we thought this franchise was dead, you know, because Part 5, it's grown in popularity. It's got a cult following now, but back then, okay, guys, we're done, you know, and it was called A New Beginning. Part 6 comes back and really just injects new life into the franchise. It was very tongue-in-cheek. It really honed in on what Jason is as a character, and that is fun. And this might be the most entertaining, the funnest of the franchise. And you got that great Frankenstein-inspired opening, probably one of my favorite openings of the franchise, if I'm being honest. This is the only movie that doesn't have nudity in it, and that's okay. This is the only movie that has kids in it, I think. But CJ Graham's fantastic as Jason. And just so much fun to be had with Part 6. You know, very tongue-in-cheek, but so effective. Okay, guys, top 10. We are in Tier 1 land now. I would say almost all of these movies, in my mind, are 5 out of 5 movies. Completely top-notch, all right? So, number 10. So excited. Number 10, Halloween 2. And you might ask yourself, and I'm not doing a Talking Heads video, but Lee, I've seen your rankings, and Halloween 2 is never that high. It usually doesn't even crack my top 5 in the franchise ranking. But I love Halloween 2 as a sequel. I think it captures exactly what you want as the quote-unquote perfect sequel. You know, it marries so well to the first movie. They take place on the same night, and it just does some really amazing things. I don't think it's perfect because there's a little bit of a lull, but I love that it's the only movie that's a true hospital slasher. I think Dick Warlock is fantastic as Myers in this. Might be one of the creepiest. I wouldn't say he's like the most intimidating, but he's definitely one of the creepiest. Best final act to me out of the franchise, you know, Prime Loomis. It really just fires on all cylinders as far as a sequel goes. Number 9, Prometheus, the prequel to Alien. And this is for some reason, this is a polarizing movie, and I don't get it because it's beautifully made by Ridley Scott. It's not a xenomorph movie, though. I mean, Ridley Scott didn't even want to put a xenomorph into this. He just wanted to explore this world, explore the space jockey, the engineers, and man, this is one of those movies, every time you watch it, you kind of notice something different. I like that there's a lot of mystery to this movie, yet it's still frightening and scary. You never know what's around the corner with this movie, and I think it really tries something different than the first Alien did, and I love that about it. Number 8, Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors. I've often heard people say this is probably one of the greatest horror sequels ever made. They're right. I saw this in the theater opening night, and the crowd was just so into this movie. It's just big. It's just so epic. They had the right elements coming together all as one. You had Nancy coming back to the fold. You had this group of young teens that were having to fight Freddy, and they had powers. So, I mean, you're grabbing from so many different story ideas and marrying it all together, and usually that falls on its face, but for some reason it just works so well in Dream Warriors. But yet it still maintains a scary overall vibe. Freddy, this is where he starts going into the comedy, the silly elements, but it's the perfect balance here. He's still creepy. You know, that scene where he sees Nancy for the first time and he's like phallic looking and he's like, you. That scene still to this day sends chills down my spine. Like really epic stuff, part 3. You could even say, you know, it might be better than the first movie. I don't know. I go back and forth between the two because it's just so different. Really, this should have been part 2. As much as I love part 2, it feels like a natural progression from the first movie. Number 7, Dawn of the Dead. George Romero's, not the remake, okay? The remake doesn't even compare to this movie. And the remake's great. I love it for what it is. One of the most important horror films in history. One of the greatest zombie films in history. You know, George Romero coming back 10 years later and making a movie on this scale with subtext that is just heavy. You can, you know, with consumerism, you know, taking place in a mall, just genius type stuff. And I love like exploring the behind the scenes of this movie, and you would think it would be dark and heavy, but you know, Romero, he knew exactly what he was doing, and he seemed like he was just having the time of his life when he was making this movie. And thank God for Tom Savini and his effects. That scene where the freaking the zombie bites into the shoulder of the lady, it still gives me nightmares to this day. Number 6, Friday the 13th, part 4. I've often said this, easily the best Friday movie of the bunch. Probably one of my all-time favorite slasher films. I saw this on VHS, I think, back in the day. I just always loved that iconic VHS with just the mask on it. When Tommy Jarvis, you know, thrusts that freaking machete in the side of Jason's head, I'd never seen anything like that, and it just floored me. Also, probably my favorite cast, you know, especially with like Crispin Glover as Jimmy and Ted. Oh my God. This movie just has everything, you know? If you want a Friday movie that just, you know, you got the nudity, you got the best Jason, and Ted White, rest in peace. Oh my God, Ted White was just a revelation. And I never got to make a video honoring him, but Ted White was and always will be my favorite Jason. And it sucks that he's gone now, but man, he left us with such a fantastic Friday movie. Number 5, Terrifier 2. Holy crap. This is the biggest surprise of the year. I went into Terrifier 2 expecting it to be good, fun. Did I expect it to be number 5 of the greatest horror sequels of all time? Hell no. But here we are, freaking 2.5 hour long slasher, probably the longest slasher movie ever, but man, it packs a heavy punch. Not a boring moment in sight, just because, you know, you get art in his best form, you know, because he can do these crazy kills, torturing his victims, and yet he can like wink at the audience as he's doing it, and you're right there with him. You're having a blast, even though you should be like, what the fuck is going on? And then you have this character, Sienna, who turns out to be like one of the greatest final girls I've ever seen. This movie, it's like what Peter Jackson did with freaking Lord of the Rings. Like, how did that happen? How did this guy who made this freaking crazy Dead Alive, you know, horror movie turn out this epic trilogy? Same thing here. Damon Leone, oh my God, what you did with Terrifier 2, you just lit a massive fire in the horror community. So many people love this movie, and you know, people running out of the theater, throwing up, all this stuff. Every time that happens, it gets nationwide coverage. So congratulations, Damon Leone, for what you've done, David Howard Thornton, for Terrifier 2. It's so good, so good. Makes my top 5. Number 4, Psycho 2. I have been kind of using Psycho 2 to promote this, and as a matter of fact, it inspired me to do this top 50. I just, you know, every now and then I start getting a Psycho 2 wild hair at my butt, and I was just thinking about Psycho 2 and how great it is. It's almost like an accident that Psycho 2 is as great as it is, because people want to compare this one to Psycho so much. And I think they both are great and they both should equally exist. But this is a different version of Norman. You know, he is more mature, he's 20 years later, whereas in the first movie, he's more like a child, kind of. And so in this one, you feel bad for the guy because he just wants to get his life back together, and these other people come into his life and they want to frame him. And it's just such a beautifully done film. Thank God for Psycho 2. Okay, guys, top 3. Number 3, Amityville II, The Possession. How many of you are surprised right now? I put this in my top 3 because it is the scariest haunted house movie, maybe the scariest movie I've ever seen in my life. In a franchise that has 3,000 movies and 2,997 of them are horrible, they somehow turn out one of the scariest movies of all time in Amityville II, The Possession. Damiani directed this movie, and Italian director, and that is why this movie is so effective, I think. Italian directors, man, they're just a different breed, and they know how to film a scene that scares the shit out of you, and that's what this one does. You're dealing with some elements of like incest, and technically this one's kind of a prequel, I think, because it's like the original family. I can't remember exactly. I don't care. It's just the movie's so freaking effective. Jack Magner, I think this might have been his like only movie. He might have done one other thing. But damn, turns in a great performance. You know, this is a character that becomes demon possessed throughout the movie. You know, this movie enters taboo territory that usually you don't cross that line, you know, concerning his sister. So not only is it terrifying because this house is just really screwed, but, you know, you feel uncomfortable because of situations like that. Yeah, this movie's a gift, guys. Amityville II, The Possession. Some of you probably haven't even seen this movie. I'm telling you, run. Don't walk, run. Watch this movie. It's so good. Better than the first, by a mile, I think. And thank God Diane Franklin's in it. She's a freaking national treasure. Number 2, top 2, guys. What could it be? Number 2, Exorcist III. Holy crap, is this movie great. It's crazy to me that Exorcist II, The Heretic, comes out and it just makes everybody do a double take. Like, what the crap was that? It's horrible. One of the most disappointing sequels of all time. And then here comes Exorcist 3 years later. Not only as effective as the first movie, but, you know, goes in a completely different territory, scares you in a different way. Father Karras is back in this movie. And, you know, the exchange between him and the demon in the final act. And you also have, depending on which version you got, Brad Dourif plays in this movie too. But this movie's just so intoxicating, and it's almost hard to explain how good it is, how effective it is, unless you actually watch it. The scares are very unexpected. Like Kinderman, you know, the scene where you see like the old lady crawling on the ceiling, crazy stuff like that. The greatest jump scare of all time is in this movie with The demon coming after the nurse in the background. You know, this is one of those movies you got to pay attention to what's in the front, but also what's in the background. You're always looking at the frame. Beautifully directed by the writer, William Peter Blatty. Wrote the first Exorcist. National treasure, Exorcist III. Okay, number one. Number one, I haven't told anybody what number one is, but if you've been paying attention, I haven't listed a certain movie that has to be on this list. Aliens. Aliens, easily the greatest sequel ever made. You know, James Cameron comes in, and this is before Terminator 2, but he comes in, and how do you top what Ridley Scott did? You make it an epic freaking action movie that still has some really unsettling xenomorph action in it. Sometimes bigger is better. And that's what Aliens is. It's a very different beast than what Alien is. There's that age-old debate, which is the better movie. It doesn't matter. They're both equally effective. And thank God Aliens isn't Alien, and vice versa. I think Ripley is the glue that holds this movie together, this franchise together. She is easily like the greatest heroine character ever created, ever put to film. She doesn't have to proclaim, "I am woman, hear me roar." She just is, you know? She knows that character back and front, and she knows exactly how to play Ripley to a T. But yeah, it's not just that. I love the military environment of this movie. I love Bill Paxton in this. Why don't you put her in charge? You know, just so many great moments, you know, cherry-picking moments that you can pick out of this movie. Lance Henriksen playing the android as Bishop, you know, the question mark throughout the movie. You know, this is a movie made up of characters, just amazing characters. And there's that saying, there's no small parts. And that's truly the case with Aliens. It is proudly the greatest horror sequel ever made. And it will probably remain as such. So that's it, guys. We did it. Top 50 horror sequels. My voice is going out. Glad I got through this. I might do another top 50, and if I can put together a list of top 50 worst horror sequels, I can do that, right? Maybe? Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I don't know. I might have to limit that one to 20, because I don't know if I can come up with 50 really bad horror sequels. Maybe, we'll see. Oh, guys, let me know down in the comments. I'd love to see your lists, you know, and I know I probably missed a few movies. There were quite a few that I hated to leave out of it, like Poltergeist 2, stuff like that, but you know, some of them had to be cut, all right? Also, be sure to come over to Killer Flicks, where we talk horror all day and every day on Fridays, Be Free for Fridays. Follow me, Drumdums, on my socials. Support me on Patreon, buy me a coffee. And guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Drumdum out.